Hi, I'm Dave Stotts from Drive Thru History. Happy Father's Day. In the United States, Father's Day is celebrated on the third Sunday in June. Typically, it's a day to honor Dad with a family picnic or a barbecue in the backyard. Sometimes fathers exploit the day and do nothing but watch sports on TV, such as baseball, auto racing, or golf. In fact, that's the reason why the U.S. Open golf tournament has a tradition of finishing on Father's Day. In recent years, retailers have tried to follow the success of Mother's Day by promoting manly greeting cards and gifts, such as sports gear, electronics, tools, and ties. I mean, what's the point of a tie, really? I mean, I guess if it's from your kids, you don't need a point. A tradition for celebrating fatherhood in Christian Europe dates back to at least the Middle Ages. It's March 19th, the feast day for Saint Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus. This feast day celebration spread around the world with Spanish and Portuguese colonialism. As such, Father's Day is still celebrated on March 19th throughout much of Latin America. Although the concept for a special day for dads has religious roots in Christian Europe, what's the history of Father's Day in America? Let's go now to the coal mining communities of West Virginia to check out the story. Historically, West Virginia is coal mining country. After the railroad companies started carving routes through the Appalachian Mountains, coal mining really took off here between 1880 and 1900. New communities popped up throughout the region virtually overnight as immigrants from Europe and African Americans from the South poured into West Virginia for jobs and better lives for their families. These beautiful rolling hills are filled with old mining towns. But on December 6, 1907, an explosion occurred in Monongah, West Virginia, that's still considered the worst mining disaster in American history. The explosion happened at the Fairmont Coal Company's number 6 and number 8 mines, probably when a spark from a miner's lantern ignited methane gas. There were officially 367 men in the two mines at the time. 362 of them died almost instantly. 250 of them were fathers. This is a monument to the Monongah mining disaster of 1907. The terrible tragedy was one of the final events leading to the creation of the United States Bureau of Mines, a government oversight agency with the mission to inspect mines, train crews, provide rescue services, and investigate disasters. It was considered a major safety initiative for coal miners in the entire mining industry. The Monongah mining disaster was also the event that led to the first recorded Father's Day in American history. On the heels of Anna Jarvis's first Mother's Day in May of 1908, a woman named Grace Golden Clayton went to the pastor of her church and asked for a service to honor all the fathers lost in the mining disaster. It was a huge loss for the communities surrounding Monongah, since these dads left behind wives and nearly 1,000 fatherless children. Pastor Robert Thomas Webb in the neighboring town of Fairmont agreed to Grace's idea, and Father's Day was held in his church about 20 miles down the road from Grafton, where the first Mother's Day in U.S. history occurred just 2 months earlier. This is the Central United Methodist Church in Fairmont, West Virginia, where the first Father's Day was held on July 5th, 1908. Known back then as Williams Memorial Methodist Episcopal Church South, the original church was torn down in 1922. It was replaced with this building, now called Central United Methodist Church. In 1985, this historical marker was erected in front of the church by the West Virginia Department of History. The town has also embraced its Father's Day roots with a variety of signs and banners that pop up from time to time. While this 1908 memorial service appears to be America's first event strictly honoring fathers, it was just a one-and-done thing. Nothing really came of it. But the following year, a woman named Sonora Smart Dodd started an official quest to establish Father's Day as a national holiday. Dodd was one of 6 children raised by her single dad and Civil War veteran William Jackson Smart. She thought that her father, and other fathers like him, deserved a special day too, just like mothers. After a year of petitioning her local government, Dodd's home state of Washington celebrated its first official Father's Day on June 19, 1910. The hub of the celebration was the YMCA in Spokane. Sonora Dodd tried to promote Father's Day as an annual event. However, she didn't have near the success as Mother's Day, and after 20 years of trying, the concept nearly died out. That's when certain trade groups finally woke up to the potential and started backing her. You see, there was big money in Mother's Day. So the manufacturers of ties, tobacco pipes, and fishing gear all liked the idea of an annual holiday that celebrated fathers, too. Interestingly, Americans picked up on the ruse and resisted the holiday for a couple of more decades. Newspapers around the country even published sarcastic articles and comic strips calling out the retailers for their thinly veiled attempt to match the commercial success of Mother's Day. But the trade groups didn't give up. And in 1966, President Lyndon B. Johnson finally issued the first proclamation honoring fathers and designating the third Sunday in June as Father's Day. 6 years later, the day was made a permanent national holiday when President Richard Nixon signed it into law in 1972. So, there you have it, the history of Father's Day in America. While I was in Fairmont, West Virginia, I borrowed my truck for the show from a pretty good guy, Nick Fantasia, the former mayor of the town. He invited me into his incredible garage where we talked about cars, baseball, and fatherhood. You know, getting to drive this 1952 5-window deluxe cab Chevy truck has been an absolute pleasure here in the beautiful state of West Virginia. And I get to thank my new friend, Nick Fantasia, mayor here in Fairmont. You're the source of this truck, so thanks for letting me drive it.
Glad to. Glad to have you.
Thanks for being with me today. Now, you are giving the upcoming Father's Day sermon.
I am. Pastor Brad and I went to college together, and he called and asked if I would give my wishes.
Okay, so at the church,
right.
the Central United Methodist Church that we profiled as being the source, the first Father's Day was celebrated there.
That's right.
So, this is a show about Father's Day.
All right.
I'm a father, you're a father.
That's right.
What's the bottom line of your upcoming sermon? Give it to us in a nutshell.
You know, it's all about relationships. I mean, that's what Father's Day is about, the relationship of a dad with the children and the relationships that dads create. I mean, it's a legacy, dads and children. You know, the first message that any father wants to deliver to their children, you got to love your mom. You know, your children's mom is the most important person in the family. So the good thing for a dad to do is make sure kids understand you got to respect and love mom. Then, of course, you know, there's that family relationship with each other. There's always a twist and a pull and back and forth, but it's always, at the end of the day, the folks that when things are hard, it's family. And that's an easy part of Father's Day message, get everybody to understand your stories and how your stories sound like their stories.
How many bad ties and soap on a rope did you get throughout the early years?
You know, honestly, I didn't get a lot of bad ties and soap on a rope, but I rarely ever got a shirt that fit.
Okay. Yeah. Too big or too small?
Pick the day. Okay. They were either too big one year.
See, a dad's work. It's probably your son bothering us here today.
Turn that off.
So, Nick, your father, World War II veteran,
yes,
also a local politician.
Yes, he was in the House of Delegates for almost 40 years.
Okay, so you're also a local politician. He's had a huge influence on you, as fathers do on their sons.
Sure.
Give us one lesson that your dad has taught you that has stuck with you.
Well, you know, today they call it pay it forward. But what my dad said, you got to give back. Whether it's a road project or a school stadium project or making sure that, you know, police have protective vests, if we're going to live in the community, you have to be a part of it, and you got to pay back. That's the number one message. You know, he raised my 5 sisters and I with. That's the number one message he professed through his whole life.
That's great.
Yeah.
Nick, thank you for letting us take your truck around for a spin. Thanks for letting us spend a little time in your amazing man cave here. This must be what John Denver meant when he said West Virginia is almost heaven, because this is an incredible place.
You filled it up, right?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Okay. Diesel, right?
Exactly.
Okay. After all these years of drive-through history, I've had the opportunity to experience a wide variety of cars from around the world. As part of Father's Day, the production team invited me out to Colorado to reminisce about nearly 20 years of awesome car segments together. When I got here to Colorado, the guys surprised me with our cleaned up and restored drive-through history vehicle for the U.S., the classic 1978 Jeep CJ7. After many years as a Jeep for the U.S. military, the CJ version stands for Civilian Jeep. It has a 258 cubic inch motor with a 4-speed manual transmission. This particular Jeep was an abandoned project, which sat in pieces in the Arizona desert for many years. A U.S. Special Forces soldier rescued it and put it back together again. And now it's ours, fully outfitted for drive-through history adventures throughout America. My Jeep's name is Trigger, after Roy Rogers' horse in all those old Western films. Roy Rogers was a great American and a major role model for kids in the 1950s. He and his wife, Dale Evans, were outspoken Christians and advocates for children's charities and adoption. Roy Rogers had an awesome cowboy code for all the young members of his popular Riders Club. Be neat and clean. Be courteous and polite. Always obey your parents. Protect the weak and help them. Be brave, but never take chances. Study hard and learn all you can. Be kind to animals and care for them. Eat all your food and never waste any. Love God and go to Sunday school regularly. Always respect our flag and our country. Since we're all about God and country here at Drive Thru History, my Jeep comes complete with the Gadsden flag, symbol of resolve during the American Revolutionary War, and the Betsy Ross flag, a symbol of America's founding principles. And I guess this Jeep was released as part of the Levi's edition back in the day, so that's nice. We restored Trigger so that I could ramble around the United States and explore some of America's exceptional history. And let me tell you, it feels great to get back out on the road again.
That's right.
style of Jeep connects to an important era in American history. When I think back on all the cars I've driven throughout the world, I have to say it's the vintage models, representing a piece of the country's history, that have made the most impact on me. I recently saw a Lego model of a swoopy, vintage Ford Mustang Fastback. Due to its complex curves, it had 1,473 parts. It inspired me to build a Lego version of the car I'll be driving here in Kiev. There are a lot fewer parts, because this is a Russian Lada. This 1980 Lada was built by the former Soviet company AutoVAZ. Loosely translated, AutoVAZ means automobile factory. The first car from the automobile factory was the Lada, which oddly is named after a boat, which was originally based on the Fiat 124 sedan. The Lada has a long history in Russia and a number of Eastern European countries. They were built to be simple and practical for a wide range of uses, such as police cars, taxis, and public service vehicles. I'd like to introduce you to my ride while in Paris, the 1967 Citroën DS. I'm liking those initials. Famous for its aerodynamic and futuristic body design and the innovative hydro-pneumatic self-leveling suspension, I personally liked the super spacious interior, retro features, and this somewhat mind-boggling manual gear shift that comes right out of the steering column. You would not believe the number of heads I turned driving around the City of Lights. I'd like to think that has something to do with the car, too. Jeepneys are the most popular means of public transportation in the Philippines. They are known for their crowded seating and crazy paint jobs. They are a well-known symbol of Philippine culture, so much so that a jeepney was exhibited in the Philippine Pavilion for the 1964 World's Fair as a national image for the Filipino people. Jeepneys were originally made from U.S. military jeeps left over from World War II. Some say jeepney is a combination of the words jeep and jitney, popular slang for an American taxi cab during wartime. Others say the word comes from jeep and knee, because passengers are jammed in so tight that their knees take a beating. I got to borrow this classic jeepney for my journey around the Philippines. Maybe they'll even let me pick up a few passengers along the way. You probably noticed that driving vintage often means driving manual. I figure all fathers should be able to drive a stick. So here's my Father's Day gift to all the guys out there. Hey dads, huddle up. Guy talk. With all the challenges of raising kids in the 21st century, I'm afraid I have one more burden to place on your sagging shoulders. You see, with all the smartphone use and espresso swilling while driving, kids no longer learn how to drive manual transmissions. The demand has dropped, and our corporate overlords have stopped offering them. And kids today don't know what they're missing. I'm so concerned about this that I'm a proud card-carrying member of Save the Manuals, an obscure, loosely formed, and largely ineffective ad hoc group of automotive enthusiasts. So, it is your job, dads, to pass on this ancient skill set. Why? Because it builds character. Duh. Does a dad need a better reason than that? Now, imagine the scene. You are a newly minted teenage manual transmission driver waiting at a light on a hill. The pressure mounts, the light turns green, and it's going to happen. As will inadvertently dumping the clutch and stalling the car in traffic. Car horns behind you begin honking. Now that's pressure. How unfair. But there's no one to plead your victimhood case to, so you must simply buck up and deal with it. Like magic, you have more character. So for you teens who are watching and dads who need a refresher, allow me to demonstrate. Now in manual vehicles, there's a third pedal on the floor. That is the clutch pedal. Now today's vehicles have 5, 6, or even 7 speeds. This 1978 Jeep has 4. Trust me, way back in the 70s, people were tougher, and doggone it, they were happy with 4. Now, to make things slightly confusing, first gear in this Jeep is really low. The reason for that is Jeeps get in tough terrain where you might need a super low gear. This is sometimes called a granny gear. No offense to all the grannies out there. So for road use, we start in second. Now depress the clutch to the floor. Then move the lever into second gear. And then, this is the tricky part, gradually lift off the clutch while giving it some gas. Now, how quickly you do this and how much gas you give will vary from car to car. This is where you develop the skill to do it smoothly. To shift to the next gear, simply depress the clutch, move it to the next gear, and then let the clutch out. On older vehicles like this, you might want to blip the throttle a little bit between shifts. It helps keep things smooth. As you come to a stop, you may need to reverse this process. It's called downshifting, and you will always want to depress the clutch and roll to a stop. Rinse and repeat. There you have it. Mystery gone. Easy peasy. Now, let me tell you one more secret. You don't really learn to drive a manual because it builds character. You do it because it makes you a better driver, and because it's fun. Happy motoring. Now, sometimes the rickety old foreign vehicles do get tiresome. They just kind of wear you out. That's when we step up our game and find some truly awesome cars. This is the 2021 Corvette Stingray C8 convertible. The C8 is the long-awaited mid-engine redesign of the Corvette that has captivated car enthusiasts around the world. After all the old vintage cars I've driven over the years, this is probably the sweetest, most powerful vehicle I've ever had the pleasure to experience. This is one local attempt at having your cake and eating it too. This is the Mitsuoka Rockstar. At first glance, you might think this car looks oddly familiar, like a vintage Corvette, but it's not quite right. What exactly am I looking at? Well, what we have here is an homage to the second-generation Chevy Corvette from the 1960s. The Rockstar is actually a four-cylinder Mazda Miata that has been rebodied to look like a Corvette, and it's only sold here in Japan. The instant giveaways are the interior and the windscreen, which are familiar to anyone who's driven the Mazda. And no Corvette has ever had a four-banger. Though the Mazda engine and chassis are virtually unmodified, I will agree that the visual change is dramatic and fun. What you're left with is a car somewhat reminiscent of old American muscle, with the fuel economy and driving performance of a modern Miata. The Rockstar is a unique mashup of time and culture. This is a 1967 Chevy convertible Corvette. This was the final year in the number 2 body design, or the C2, which many collectors consider to be the iconic shape for the Corvette. Let's take a look under the hood. It's got a 327 cubic inch V8, which pushes 300 horses. And these cool side exhausts. And this will be our ride as we journey through the American South, starting in Atlanta. You know, sometimes I go for more of a road warrior vibe. If you're gonna drive through the history of one of the most courageous, selfless, heroic statesmen in our nation's founding era, then I figure you could go with something like this, a 1980 H1 Hummer. Comes complete with an interior and an exterior. Got the little whirly-burly, got the little circular intake. It's got one of these. I think that's the fluid junction valve, one of my favorite features. One of these cool headlights with the shiny things. Wow, you can do your squats in case you get hijacked and someone has stolen the vehicle. You're trying to get back in it. You got your handles here to crawl back in and punch it. No trailer hitch is complete without 2 additional trailer hitches. Oh man, check out these big old beefy tires. Love these things. Ow, Benedict Arnold! But it is a long way back to Cairo, and I'm not about to get on the back of another camel. So I've arranged for a 1988 K5 GMC Jimmy to be my ride back to Cairo. In the end, Drive Thru History has allowed me to live out a car fantasy that many guys share around the world. Now, one of the greatest Father's Day gifts I receive from my family each year is the time, support, and understanding for me to travel the world making TV shows about God, history, and cars. After my incredible Father's Day gift from the guys, I drove up the road a bit to Colorado Springs to further investigate the role of fatherhood in history and culture. I was honored to meet with Jim Daly, president of Focus on the Family, who's dedicated his life and ministry to biblical parenting. We sat down in their awesome radio studio before one of his broadcasts. Well, Jim Daly, welcome to, this is your studio, but it's Drive Thru History, Father's Day special, so happy Father's Day.
Thank you so much. It's great to have you here.
Yeah, thank you. So tell me your Father's Day traditions. What do you like to get? What do you like to do? And have you gotten any gift that is just like really awesome? Or maybe really terrible, but except your kids are going to see this maybe. So
I mean, some of it's a little embarrassing. So, I mean, it might be a shaving kit.
I've got a few of those.
And, but mostly it's just time being together. That we'll say, what do we want to do for lunch? What do we want for dinner? It's the all day kind of thing for me. So, I mean, we'll go out, shoot guns together and, just have fun and kick back. But for the most part, it's just hanging out together.
Yeah.
And I love the relationship with my boys is so much fun because we can get to laughing so hard that, milk comes out our nose. And we love those moments when we're laughing about nothing.
Yeah.
And just the laughter itself is making us laugh.
Yeah.
And I just love the joy of that. It can't be concocted.
So you're president of Focus on the Family, an organization dedicated to promoting the institution of the family. So you probably think about parenthood, fatherhood, every day of your life.
I do.
Yeah. So when people hear your story of your childhood, your upbringing, they're surprised given what you do now. So give us a little snapshot of your childhood.
Yeah. I mean, I love the psalm that says he's close to the brokenhearted and saves those crushed in spirit. And that was my story as a child. I didn't have the ideal family. My dad was an alcoholic. My mom and dad divorced when I was 5. My mom remarried when I was 8 to a really not so kind stepfather. And then my mom died a year and a half later. I ended up in foster care, and that was a disaster, not a very healthy family that I was with. And then I moved in with my brother, who had just married his teen girlfriend after she got pregnant. So that's where I went. I lived there with my brother in junior high and high school.
So the importance of fatherhood is not an academic question for you.
Never.
Yeah, it's not something you read about in a textbook.
I think it gets lost in that, the academics of, I mean, it's important. It's important to know what fathers contribute to a family, and it's substantial. When you look at the prisons, 85% of the guys in prison did not have a father in the home. We want to take care of the prison issue. Let's keep marriages together. Let's keep dads engaged with their kids. That's the silver bullet. And I think when you look at all the indications of what's going on in the culture, dads bring an awful lot to the parenting role. And it's been relegated to the back seat, if that.
Yeah.
We sometimes are just thought of as sperm donors. And that's unfortunate because fathers play a significant role in the development of their children.
So you wrote a book about it.
I did.
The Good Dad, Becoming the Father You Were Meant to Be. Given your vantage point on all this, give us a sort of a snapshot of the condition of fatherhood in America today.
Yeah, I mean, the snapshot is not very good. Probably 24 million kids are going to wake up tomorrow with no dad in the home. That's devastating given the data. I mean, something in the 75 percentile of suicides, teen suicides, occur with a father not in the home. Desperation, the depression rates of teens, mostly 71% of depressed teens, there's no dad in the home. And I just think it's one of the most overlooked benefits of the family. And the culture does nothing to support lifting up fathers in this culture. And so when you look at the book, there's Actually, not many good dad books, frankly. And the point of it is, dads, we're so compartmentalized. We think we have to fix all the problems. Most of the time, it's just being present with your child.
Right.
That's what they want. They don't want your time.
Yeah.
They want to be with you. But I think it's so true. And you know, one of the things that studies are showing right now, even for teenagers, when asked, who do you believe has your best interests in mind, or et cetera, any of those, it'll be mom and dad. It's not the best friend. It's not somebody else. It's usually mom and dad. I think the number was like 70% of teens believe their relationship with their parents is the most important relationship.
I wonder if the parents would reciprocate that even.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I think we as parents, we don't even believe that. And then we back up. And dads, we're great at backing up.
Yeah.
You know, we just go absent if we don't know what to say or do. We just compartmentalize it. Stay engaged. That's what I suggest. Stay engaged.
Well, you know, I heard somebody say that the older they get, the more intelligent their father seems to be. And I would imagine there's a lot of wisdom in your book, The Good Dad. And give us a few morsels of wisdom, maybe that you have learned over the years that our viewers can benefit from.
No, I mean, that's one of them. Just relax. Enjoy the journey. You know, one of the things that I did, because I traveled globally, so I bought really nice journals for both my boys, and I would journal to them. And I've just given them to them. I've talked about the journals. They've never seen them. But I was able to, you know, express to them in writing what are the important things to me, what I went through as a kid, what I'm grateful they didn't have to go through,
Right.
What our family history is, what it means to be a Christian, all those things. I mean, they're 400 pages each.
Wow. And
they're both filled today. And I've got their first baseball game tickets. I've got their first Disneyland tickets. I've got all their firsts in there, taped in there.
Yeah.
And it's just
It's priceless.
Really awesome thing. And my now 20-year-old, you know, he said, man, I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. It was so amazing to see what you were expressing to me. I wouldn't have gotten that response at 15. And so partly you just have to enjoy the ride, but be present in their lives, talk to them, find something that they enjoy doing and do it with them. Those are all the parenting kind of tips that are important.
Yeah.
How to be the dad, but how to also be that good friend. And I do that. I try to do that.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be. There is that friend aspect. It's so easy to tell yourself, no, I'm the dad. I've got to be the authority. But no, sometimes you've got to come alongside them, be their friend, laugh with them. And like you say, let them make mistakes and enjoy a kid has to feel like their dad enjoys time with them.
You know, one thing, Dave, that I've noticed with marriage or with parenting is how simple God is trying to make it for us. I think it's a metaphor for spiritual things. So when we look at the prodigal son and how the father's running toward that boy that's coming home, the love that he has for him, that's the dad I want to be.
Yeah.
Even when my kids are making mistakes, I want to be running toward them, embracing them, certainly helping them better understand the wisdom of the moment, what were the better choices perhaps, but that comes later. The embrace and being welcomed back in when you think you're on the outside, or I've done something so stupid, Dad could never love me again.
Right.
Isn't this the whole thing with our Father in heaven?
Yeah.
And I think that's what it's all about. Whatever snares us here in this life, it's not as important as putting our hope and trust in Christ.
There are a lot of evidences of God's design in the world. We're surrounded by it. But in some ways, the Father might be the best example we can find.
Amen. You said it well. That's perfect.
So, Jim, I really appreciate the time you've taken with us today. Thanks so much.
It's great to be with you. Thanks for highlighting fathers. We need to do that.
Absolutely. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
After my visit to focus on the family, I realized I'm doing okay with this whole fatherhood thing. Although I'm far from perfect, I do take my God-given role and responsibility seriously. I'd like to think I check many of the biblical boxes, and I know how to tell a sweet dad joke.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dave Stotts.
How's everybody doing? What makes a dad joke a dad joke? When it becomes apparent. Why couldn't the bicycle stand up? Because it was too tired. Get it? Like too tired. Why was the big cat disqualified from the race? Because he was a cheetah.
Ooh.
Did you guys hear about the restaurant on the moon? Yeah, it's great food, no atmosphere. Kind of like now. Did you guys hear about the cheese factory that exploded in France? Debris was everywhere. I hate jokes about German sausages. Am I right? Yeah, they're the worst. Okay, I got this. What do you call a deer with no eyes?
No one cares.
No-eyed deer. Okay, what do you call a guy who doesn't believe in Santa Claus? Eggnog stick. Somebody laugh, please. Please. So when my family asked me what I wanted for Father's Day this year, I replied, like most hardworking dads would. Simple, really. Nothing big. Just want to spend 24 hours living like a lord of the manor in my own castle. I have to say, when I asked my kids for the ultimate Father's Day gift, I had no idea they would pull this off. Do my kids come through or what? Ashford Castle was established in 1228 by the Anglo-Norman House of Burke. Over the centuries, this medieval castle has changed hands through battles, marriages, and purchases. In the mid-1800s, the Guinness family acquired the property, adding 2 large Victorian-style extensions and 2,600 acres of trees. Today, Ashford Castle is an incredible 5-star luxury resort on the shore of Lough Corrib in Western Ireland. A long list of presidents, monarchs, sheiks, and movie stars have stayed here over the years. And now, history hosts. St. John, bring my car. Irish wolfhounds were bred as massive hunting dogs. The name originates from their purpose, wolf hunting, rather than their appearance. Today, they're considered the tallest of all dog breeds, although the Great Dane is the heaviest. The breed is thousands of years old, originally developed from a line of warhounds. Ancient texts and woodcuts place them in Ireland by the 3rd century BC. Survivors of Celt attacks would mention the huge, ferocious dogs that fought alongside the warriors. Roman leaders, including Julius Caesar, wrote about the fierce dogs for hundreds of years. In 391 AD, the Roman consul to the region received 7 of them as a gift for fighting lions and bears. He wrote, "All Rome viewed them with wonder." During the English occupation of Ireland, only the nobility were allowed to own Irish wolfhounds. The higher the position, the more wolfhounds one could own. They were highly coveted and were frequently given as gifts to world leaders and foreign nobles. Wolfhounds were the companions of the elite and were housed alongside them. Today, Irish wolfhounds are centuries removed from the breed that struck fear into the ancient world. Irish wolfhounds are often chosen for their loyalty, affection, patience, and devotion. While no longer considered a hunter or a guard dog, their close affinity with humans makes them very loyal and sensitive to ill will towards their owners. They're still considered excellent personal guardians, and their huge size is still rather imposing. The oldest established falconry school in Ireland operates here on the grounds of Ashford Castle. I will be flying, that's what they call it, this Harris hawk. Now, the ancient and noble art of falconry is a sport which involves the use of trained raptors, birds of prey, to hunt wild game for humans. It's believed falconry originated on the steppes of Asia over 4,000 years ago. In Ireland, there are also ancient roots of falconry. The earliest mention in an Irish text is the life of St. Colman in the 12th century, when the king of Tara is said to have 2 hunting hawks. Now, over the centuries, firearms have replaced falconry as the more effective means of hunting. Yeah, that's right, you're fired. However, falconry is still a cherished art and will always be known as one of the sports of kings. That's right, you're hired again. You're back on. you and me. We're a team. I'm feeling something here. I can see you with like a side of potatoes, carrots, with a buttery glaze, kind of a marmalade with a roll. Are you ticklish? Are you ready to go fly? All right, let's do this. Let's go fly. Ashford Castle in County Mayo, Ireland was a truly epic experience, one I won't ever forget. But now back to the real world of being a dad, husband, and, well, history show host. My next guest today understands the gritty reality of parenting in the 21st century. He's got a unique story, being raised on the streets of Chicago, and now has a really powerful apologetics outreach in our cities. His Facebook says it all: husband, father, poet, teacher. Welcome, Preston Perry.
Thanks for having me,
Happy
Dave.
Father's Day to you.
Happy Father's Day to you too, sir.
Yeah, so what I want to do at the beginning here is to ask you to take us back to your upbringing on the streets of Chicago. Give us a little bit of a snapshot of what your life was like growing up.
Yeah, so I grew up in a fatherless home. My father didn't raise me. I was raised by my mom. She raised me, my brother, my sister, and my sister had a child at an early age, and so she ended up raising her grandchild in a lot of ways at an early age. And my mom, she was a hard worker. You know, she worked 3 jobs, sometimes 4 jobs to, you know, put food on the table, clothes on our back. But because my mom was gone, you know, a lot, the streets kind of raised me, you know? And so my mom, she just couldn't be there for me as much as possible, as much as she wanted to. And so a lot of times growing up, you know, early as 11, 12, I was in the streets, you know, selling drugs, got into gangs at an early age, fighting, stealing, breaking in homes. I mean, I did a lot of stuff, you know, and the guys on the block kind of taught me, you know, who I was. And so at an early age, I was searching for identity, which I think a lot of men in my neighborhood, young men in my neighborhood was doing. They were searching for somebody to tell them who they were, you know, and give them identity. And so you look to the older guys on the block, you know, because they're the only example of fatherhood, of manhood. And so, yeah, they taught me who I was at an early age. Gave me a false identity of who I was at an early age. And yeah, I just grew up just doing a whole lot of bad things that God had to deliver me from.
Then fast forward now to where you are now. You're married, you're a husband, you have kids.
Yeah.
You're a Christian, you're
Yeah.
walking with the Lord, you have a ministry, God's using you in powerful ways.
Yeah.
So what was the turning point then for you? How did you get from there to here?
Man, my life is so, I feel like I'm not supposed to be here at all. When I became a Christian, I started to write poetry, and I started to perform poetry, and it blew up on YouTube. And then I met my wife, who was an amazing poet, author, teacher, and we just began to do ministry together. And we at first started off doing spoken word poetry. And then from there, we started to realize that we had a teaching gift. And so she started to teach on, you know, sexuality, because my wife has a testimony of being brought, you know, out of the lifestyle of homosexuality. I grew up in the streets and grew up around so many different worldviews. And so I love apologetics and evangelism. And so I started to do that later on in my Christian walk. And so, I don't know, in some weird way, it kind of brought me here. I think it's just really just the sovereignty of the Lord. You know, I didn't have any plans for it. I didn't, you know, I never planned to, you know, be here. I never even planned to be a Christian, but I just think that in God's grace, I wasn't checking for God, but God was checking for me. I wasn't looking for God, God was looking for me. And now that I see that He had a purpose for my life and a plan for my life that I did not know anything about, but I'm grateful that He did.
So Preston, we're talking about fatherhood today. So you have fatherhood and you have Christian fatherhood.
Yeah.
You and I are Christian dads. In some ways, being a dad who follows Christ is maybe more difficult.
Yeah,
God calls
is.
us to sacrifice
I
for
think it
another.
is.
Calls us to die to ourselves. So has that given you some perspective when it comes to your own dad? Maybe finding some reconciliation there, finding some healing, forgiveness. Give us a little snapshot of what it's like with your dad now.
Absolutely. It's funny that you asked me that, because it wasn't until I became a Christian that I truly had grace and mercy from my father growing up, you know? Because I think when you become a Christian, it just puts everything in perspective. It lets you see that men are not, they've not sinned against you just because they wanted to, but we're all affected by this thing called sin and depravity, right? And so because of that, I feel like my father, in a lot of ways, he tried to do his best, but his best wasn't good enough, not because he didn't love me, but because he's a sinner, right? And I see that in my own life. I'm in my children's life. I live with my wife, you know, I live with my children, but I still fall short. And so I think when you become a Christian, not just in fatherhood, but just holistically, everything, you fall short of Christ in every single area of your life, right? And I think that God calls us to come to him for help, you know, in our shortcomings. And so I don't think it's something that I should feel bad for, that I fall short of God's, you know, perfection. But it lets me know I should continue to run back to him to be a good father, right? He is the prototype. He is the standard. And so my father growing up, he didn't have that standard. He didn't have anything. He only had the world to teach him how to be a father. And so because of that, and knowing that now, I have way more grace for my father than I did growing up, you know?
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your perspective now as a dad.
Yeah.
You have kids, you do this adventure called fatherhood.
Yeah.
What are some lessons you've learned being a dad?
Man, I think the main lesson that I've learned is to really look for God to be my standard, right? You know, I'll never forget this story that my aunt told me about how my father was fathered. And my father literally thought that he was a good father because he didn't do the things that his father did. So I look at my father, and when I first became a father, I said, I'm not gonna do the things that my father did. But really, I don't need to look at man. I need to look at God to be the standard. And I think a lot of times we make that mistake of looking to how our father fathered us and how his father fathered him and saying, I'm not gonna make those mistakes. But then what we do is we end up missing out on so many other things because we're not allowing the perfect one to be the standard. And so I try not to look at the mistakes of my father or any other man. I try to look to God, the perfect father, to be the standard, you know, of all things. And so I think that's helped me.
Yeah.
That's freed me as well.
So tell us about whether or not you think, Preston, that from a large scale perspective, that there are negative ramifications for this epidemic of fatherlessness. Is it as bad as they say? And what can we do about it?
It is bad. I think it is bad, especially, you know, in poverty-stricken areas. I think that in a lot of ways, I think when I see fatherlessness, I see it in poor neighborhoods. And so for some reason, I feel like there has been generations of men who don't really know their place or even understand their place in the home, or been stripped out of their home because of incarceration, selling drugs, and all of this stuff. And I think that what we need to do, I personally feel like we need more evangelists. I personally feel like we need more people to hit the streets and let people know that, you know, you're not just like this because you're a bad person. You're like this because you don't know your Heavenly Father. And I think that a lot of men, especially growing up, where I grew up, I personally feel like they didn't know they had a place in the home. And so they ended up in the streets, and when you end up in the streets, you end up in jail or you end up dead. And so I really think that we need more Christians to be brave and courageous, to let people know that, no, you have a place not only in the home, but in the kingdom of God. I think the gospel of Jesus Christ will help people, especially in poverty-stricken areas, be better men, better fathers, and better disciples.
Well, clearly you're pretty good at this spoken word thing.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear a little bit of your art.
Yeah,
You
man.
willing to maybe share some spoken word with us?
Absolutely, I like you guys, so I'll do that.
A freebie? You'll give us one for free?
Yeah, man.
Awesome.
Let's do it. A wise man once riddled that you will never understand the joys and pains of being a father until you become one. And then came Eden, a little paradise of my own. My daughter poured out of my wife's womb like an overflow of grace and blossomed my fertile heart into spring. I swear I wasn't ready to gaze upon her big bright eyes. They were the first moons I saw up close in this dark world. I didn't know a newborn can arrive bellowing in so much beauty. Vitamin E soaked radiant melanin, Eden reminds me that we have African ancestors who didn't mind the sun's heat smoldering over their skin, and for generations let it bake them into rich chocolate. I didn't know someone so small can turn my chest into a cathedral. The way my heart sings symphonies every time I walk in the door, and she smiles at me like a warm sunrise greeting a chilled ocean in the morning. God, I can't help but to think that you knew what you were doing when you allowed me to unwrap this gift called fatherhood. In fact, I can still smell the day you became my father. It was in the wee hour of the morning. Outside was the color of everything new. Dawn just began to chip away at my face, and I saw the grace of God in my life for the first time. I cried out to you, sort of like Eden did when she broke free from the warmth of the womb. You broke me free from my chains, grabbed me by the heart, and slow danced me into salvation. And since then, you have embraced me as your child. Cradle me in your will. Nurse me with the milk of Mark, Luke, and John until I was old enough to take part of the meat in a Roman's feast. Before you blessed me with this Hershey-skinned, honey-dipped, vibrant ball of laughter, perched smile of a child, I confound in the significance of you fathering me. Sometimes I stare at Eden, sitting in a puddle of her own innocence, and I know my love for her is permanent ink. A stubborn mountain no man can move. How much more than a God who chose to father me before time had a name, before the stars bloomed, beaming from the splendor of your speech and suspended their glow in the void of forever midnights. Eden didn't have to do anything but be born for me to father her fearlessly. I didn't have to do anything but be born again for you to father me fearlessly. Thank you for your relentless pursuit of my elusive soul. When I was lost in sin without a whisper of where, I am only a microcosm of a father compared to your grandeur. You are teaching me what it means to love like I have no other options but to die daily for my offspring. But the difference is that you are Savior and Daddy. And I promise my children will see me mimic your parenting all the days of my breath. You are the standard father I would never be, but I will always be yours. I will always be son, tattooed on your palm in fresh ink. Even when I'm old, skin resembling aged grapes wrinkled and raisined by the sun, hair a gray sky of wisdom, I will still be the young man you adopted in his room years ago. I looked my reflection in the eyes and asked him, will I ever be fit to father? Will my bones ever be gentle enough to nest and nurture a small body I helped create? God, you answered that daunting question and you blessed me. Eden, my growing garden girl, was the genesis of everything possible I can be as a father. God, you made it happen when you gave me her. So I give her back to you, praying that one day you will help father her as well.
When it comes to Father's Day, I think the greatest thing to celebrate is personally knowing God, my Abba Father in heaven. The word Abba is an Aramaic word that means father. It was a common term that expressed affection and trust. For me, Abba represents that childlike confidence that a young kid puts in his daddy. As Christians, we are the children of God, privileged to call him Abba Father. When we are born again, we are redeemed from our sins, reconciled to God. Part of that new relationship is that God now deals with us differently, as family. Becoming an adopted child of God is the highest and most humbling of honors. We have a new relationship with God and a new standing before Him. Instead of running from God and trying to hide our sin like Adam and Eve did, we run to Him, calling Abba Father, and we find forgiveness in Jesus Christ. Romans 8:15 tells us that we did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but we have received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. When Jesus taught His disciples to pray, He began with the words, Our Father. There is great hope in those two words alone. The all-powerful, all-knowing God of the universe not only allows us, but encourages us to come to Him as Abba Father. Now that is an incredible thing to celebrate on this Father's Day in America.